All right, back to the woodshed. So today we're going to be talking about Mr. Goodchord, otherwise known as the Almanac of Voice Leading for Guitar by Mick Goodrick, who is, a world-renowned pedagogue and a guitarist who's played with lots of people. One of the popularizers of the ergonomic sort of Klein guitar, which I love. He's a great dude. He's opened up a lot of doors for a lot of guitarists, and he did comment on one of these YouTube videos somewhere, but word on the street is that he doesn't have email or a computer, so maybe it's not a real Mr. Goodchord, aka Mr. Mick Goodrick himself. But anyway, let's get started. So in this lesson, we're going to just talk about a quick disclaimer from Mick about not playing anything that's going to cause injury. But then we'll get into why this is basically a source book, and it's meant for a new generation of guitarists. And I put guitarist in asterisks here, or with an asterisk, because he basically says don't share this stuff with other musicians that aren't guitarists, but that's totally a joke because this is applicable to any instrument. But he's trying to keep it hermetically sealed from the other instrumentalists for the sake of us guitarists. So I don't think that he actually cares. I've definitely heard of other people. I got this stuff from Russ Ferrante in the first place, who's a pianist and composer, from the Yellow Jackets. So it's obviously used by people who aren't guitarists, but it's sort of framed as a guitar book, maybe as misdirection in a sort of hermetic sense. Anyway, so we're going to pick up where we left off also with the voice leading cycle 2 from the previous lesson, Woodshed 003, and we'll get into some other cycles and how to go about voice leading in that. So then we're going to talk about invalid and functional voice leading and what exactly is MSRP. So let's get started. So let's talk about this disclaimer. Mick just basically wants you to be careful, and depending on the voice type, the inversion, your instrument, your hands, many of these chords are going to be dangerous. So if you feel like you are stretching your tendons too much, just stop. Do not do anything that causes discomfort, let alone pain. Certainly you should never endure pain while practicing this stuff. And you might be like, what are you talking about, John? These are just chords. How can they hurt you? Well, because they are such a systematic exploration of chords and voice leading between them, not all of them are suited for every instrument. Some of them are going to be super big stretches on guitar. Like some of them will be like a 6-fret stretch. So just to give you a sense of what I mean, let's talk about C major 7 in third inversion, closed voicing. So again, C major 7, C, E, G, B. That's already in the closed voicing. So if we go to third inversion, that means that the 7th is in the root. So from bottom to top, it would be B, C, E, G. Okay, so maybe if you're a guitarist, you've already sort of figured out why this is going to be an issue. So let's assume that we're playing this on the top 4 strings of the guitar. And so you aren't going to be utilizing any open strings. So don't play that B or that E as an open string. And don't play this anyway. I'm going to show you a picture of why it hurts, so don't do it. And don't worry, no John fingers were hurt in the making of this. So on a side note though, using open strings is cool, and plenty of people have really, really excelled at this by approaching this sort of thing systematically, notably John Stoll and Ryan Ferreira, both incredible guitarists in their use of open strings. But basically, we'll get to open strings later. The fingerings this way don't really translate from key to key because obviously, not even every, key center is going to have E naturals or B naturals. So we can't just always count on those as open strings that we can use. So here is this third inversion C major 7. It might not look that painful, but you can see here that, it's not really that painful for me because I'm really good at guitar and I have big fingers, but my middle finger here is collapsed and it's kind of bent the wrong way, and I'm stretching with my first finger on the 3rd fret of the E string down to my pinky on the I believe that's the 9th fret of the D string, And so that's a big old stretch. It's 6 bars or 6 frets apart. Requires collapsing that finger to not only just collapse it, but to bar 2 adjacent notes. And then, the 4 of those 6 frets of stretch are basically between the ring finger and the pinky. So it's not the healthiest chord to be playing. And here I've sort of outlined where these chords are, or where these problems are, and they're color coded. So this one doesn't look as bad, right? And this is the exact same chord, but what you'll notice is that there isn't the collapsed finger for the bar, and this is because of the tuning of the guitar. So, when you're playing on the top 4 strings, it's the string set you're using is D, G, B, E. So that's basically like perfect 4th, major 3rd, perfect 4th. And then when you move it down a string set, the intervals of those strings are perfect 4th, major 3rd. And so the need for the bar disappears because the major 3rd has been moved to a different place. Additionally, because you're higher up the neck, like when you go down a string set, it's going to put you up higher on the neck. And if you go up a string set, you can't in this case, but if there were an additional string, then everything would move lower on the fretboard. But because you're higher up on the neck, it basically means that the frets are closer together, so it's not as much of a stretch. That being said, this chord is still potentially dangerous. It still has a big old stretch between the pinky and the ring finger, but it's not quite as bad. And just a little side note, aside from the playability, basically, this will get you a different sort of timbre and even some different intonation characteristics than the first fingering, just because you're using thicker strings and they're higher up on the neck. And so it's going to sound a little bit different, but it's the same collection of pitches. Okay, so Mick describes this book in the beginning as basically like a source book for future guitarists, or like a future generation of guitarists. And I'm just going to rephrase this and call it a source book of overwhelm, because when it says source book, it basically means that all the answers are there in front of you. The book isn't telling a story. It's not presenting information like a textbook would or anything like that. It's essentially just this exhaustive kind of humongous list of all the answers that there are. And I almost feel like the book is kind of like a performance art, because it's doing this thing where it's changing the way that you think about this content. It's making you come face to face with the sheer vastness of it. So it's a huge list of answers, and they're all presented in a somewhat generic, non-prescriptive fashion. So I think this type of approach is very interesting. Other books that are like this include Wayne Krantz's excellent Improviser's OS. This is a little small book that basically just lists off a ton of answers and then gives you some suggested ways to approach it. The Harmony book by Elliott Carter, this basically breaks down all the pitch class sets and his language for it versus Alan Forte's language. Then the infamous Slonimsky Thesaurus of Scales and Melodic Patterns. This was, it's well known that John Coltrane basically shed this all the time, and it's got a lot of humor in there too, but I feel like the type of person that makes this type of thing is a humorous fellow or humorous lady, depending, they're going to basically, there's a sense of humor because they're just giving you all the answers and being like, yeah, good luck. See you in a few decades. But the gist of this, though, is that you don't want to read the dictionary, basically. You want to download and digest it. Like, imagine that, whatever that guy's name that has the neuro whatever, Musk or whatever his name is, imagine that you have some gear like that where you're just able to download a book and have it immediately, in your mind. Basically, like, the beauty of this is that you see the vastness of the material. You see that this harmonic realm is, endless pretty much. And it puts in a tangible, sort of visceral framing so that, you actually see how much stuff there is to go through. Now, this being said, you don't want to get totally paralyzed by this. You don't want to get so bogged down that you don't do it. You're never going to be able to fully get this, really, unless you're Ben Monder, basically. But like for the mortals among us, you want to just get as much of it as you can. You just want to immerse yourself in the materials and do whatever you can with it. Don't worry too much about like getting through every single page. That's not the point. The point is to get the gist of it and then run with it. So that's why he's putting it in a prescriptive manner, and basically just encouraging you to get into the materials and become intimately familiar with them. You don't want to do any rote memorization because it's going to be a lost cause. It's not going to be something that you can ever complete with that method. So, while this is an exhaustive printout of every single answer, the point is that you want to be able to generate the materials here, and you want to compress them and internalize them. You should be able to rederive all the answers as needed. You don't want to have to be like, let me look it up in the almanac. It's kind of like you want to be able to figure out what a new word means, or like the etymology of a word based on just your awareness of similar words, and like, oh, this prefix means this. And so you want to have this sort of familiarity with the content like that, where you can actually sort of deduce what's going on without having to reference the book. So on Woodshed 003, or in Woodshed 003, we left off with some homework, and that's how to voice lead through cycle 2. And again, just a little refresher, cycle 2 refers to a progression where each step is a generalized second, or a diatonic second, between each chord. So that means, basically you ascend in the scale, like C major 7, in this case of, tertian 7th chords, C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, so on. Now, you might notice something, and that's that cycle 7 refers to a progression with generalized sevenths between each chord. So that means, you start on C major 7, next chord is B minor 7 flat 5, or B half diminished, to A minor 7, to G7, etc. So, what do you notice here? Well, the generalized 7th, or the diatonic 7th, is basically the opposite of a generalized second. So while, one could just do, cycle 2 and cycle 7, if you did, cycle 2 and then cycle 7, you would come back down. So each step moves up or down one step of a generalized second, and in this context, moving down a generalized second is equivalent to a cycle 7. So this is talking about the chords themselves, not the inner voices. The point is to move the voices in a manner that's kind of voice-led rather than just in parallel. But each cycle has a kind of complementary inverse cycle that is related to it. So cycle 2 and cycle 7 are basically complementary and inverse of one another. Cycle 3, cycle 6, and then cycle 4 and cycle 5. So basically you could move, like this diagram on the left side, you could just move each note up to the next chord tone. C becomes D, B becomes C, and, by the way, this chord on the left does not enclose voicing. I just took a picture. If anybody can tell me what voicing type this is, I will give you a free 30-minute Zoom lesson to the first person that comments, not to everybody, sorry. But doing everything in parallel like this is kind of tactless, honestly, and, it just lacks sophistication. It's kind of obvious. But instead, what we want to do is basically, let's just start with the C major 7. We have C major 7. The next chord we want to go to is D minor 7. Okay? But we can't move these chords up just one tone. So let's just keep the C exactly where it is. That's a common tone. So its function is going to go from being the root of C major 7 to the 7th of D minor 7. But it just stays exactly where it is. Okay, now ignoring that C common tone, Now the remaining tones are going to be E, G, and B. This is an E minor triad. So we want to move altogether from C major 7 to D minor 7. We have the 7th of the D minor 7, the C. So we just need a D minor triad, D, F, and A. So the E minor triad can move down to a D minor triad, and we've got our new chord. E minor triad moves down to D minor triad, new chord. So it looks like this. The C stays where it is. The other ones all move down by a generalized second. Cool. So we can do the same thing yet again, but you may notice that it doesn't stay the same. The C doesn't stay the same. Now the D stays the same. So the root of the chord stays where it is and becomes the 7th of the next chord. The remaining tones all move down by a second. So we do it yet again, and we get F major 7, where the E stays the same from E minor 7 to F major 7, going from root to 7th. And then the other chord tones move down by a step. So this just sums up those rules. And basically, with any cycle and its voices, it will have a set of rules like this that we can put into words, or Mick will do it in diagrams. So that's where intervallic and functional models of voice leading come in. And this is all pretty much the same stuff. And when we get into MSRP, that's also pretty much the same thing. It's just the dynamics of the voices in these chords and how they move with voice leading that isn't totally in parallel. So the intervallic voice leading for that cycle we just went through is basically the root stays where it is, the 3rd moves down a second, the 5th moves down a second, and the 7th moves down a second. What about functional? That means that the root becomes the 7th, the 3rd becomes the root, the 5th becomes the 3rd, and the 7th becomes the 5th. Cool. So then what exactly is MSRP? Well, it's melodic strand replication procedure. So Mick says in the book, basically, in answer to what is MSRP, MSRP stands for Melodic Strand Replication Procedure. It's a name I came up with to describe some very interesting things that showed up while I was figuring out all these voice leadings. Again, I'm deliberately not going to go into much detail about all this so that each person can, quote, rediscover it as I did. On each page, you'll see intervallic voice leading, functional voice leading, of which there are 2 different directions, or depictions rather, and MSRP at the bottom. All of them are essentially the same thing, just different ways of looking at it. However, it does get really interesting when you see all of these chords and voicings are also melodies. So that's getting at what this MSRP is. Actually, in most cases, it's a single melody. So this is the musical version of what came first, the chicken or the egg? In other words, what came first, melody or harmony? To which I reply to both questions, both arose simultaneously. MSRP is like melodic DNA that makes up harmony. Good luck. Cool. So here's an example of the melodic strand replication procedure for the closed voicing cycle 2 that we just looked at. And so this is basically a melody that occurs with this sort of pattern of movement where the root stays the same, becoming the 7th, and all the other chord tunes move down by a second. And so as you go through this voice leading and the dynamics of it, this is the little melody that comes up. So C, C, B, A, G, G, F, E. So basically, note, note, down a note, down another note. And then that repeats after you've gone down yet again. So it's this kind of do, 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 do. You can't get that low, but you get what I'm saying. So it's this interval shape that kind of creates its own little melody, and this is kind of like the DNA, as Mick says. So this type of stuff is all emergent, and just you'll see it after you've sort of fiddled around with the materials. But let's just review what we talked about, and that will conclude this lesson. So first of all, don't be a hero. Don't hurt your fingers playing this stuff. Second, immerse yourself in the materials. Don't try to go through the book page by page. The goal here is to digest the big picture concept so you can derive the answers on your own, and you don't need to use this like a reference book. You just want to digest it and embody it. Okay. And so we talked about cycle 2 and how that is essentially complementary to cycle 7, and 7 is complementary to cycle 2. Similarly, cycle 3 and cycle 6 have that same relation, and cycle 4 and cycle 5 have the same relation. So voice leading shouldn't all be in parallel, but rather it should involve contrary motion in functional intervallic rules. So this is like where the root stayed the same and became the 7th of the next chord, while all the other chord tones moved down by a step. That's as opposed to each chord tone moving up a step. So it's just essentially chord, move it all up. Instead, we want the chord itself to move up, with each voice moving down if it can, so that there's a little bit more of a weaving sort of quality to the voices that has more stationary. It's a little bit more stationary, but it has contrary motion, so it's altogether, I would say, just more sophisticated and more interesting to the ear. And lastly, we talked about MSRP, which is the melodic strand replication procedure, and how this is basically a sort of melodic DNA strand for each cycle. So, again, as Mick says, if somebody asks which came first, chicken or the egg, which came first, harmony or melody, they both arose simultaneously, he says. So, take that for what it's worth, and have fun doing your voice leading. So, thanks for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, leave a thumbs up. Remember, in this one, there was a little picture that I put in there that was not of a closed voicing chord. So if you can tell me which of the 6 voicings that is, and be the first to comment, free 30-minute Zoom lesson for you. And please share this with other viewers. It's very helpful and helps spread the word of this content. And if you'd like to support financially this creation of content, then head over to patreon.com/Lambertronics. Options start off at just a few bucks a month, and it really helps encourage me to continue to make this type of stuff. So thanks for watching. I'll talk to you in the next lesson.